The castle icon lights up on a November night in 2019. A film begins in a kitchen in Ohio, a bedroom in London, a phone on a delayed train. Disney has just opened the door it spent years promising. Families believe they are stepping into a studio vault. They are stepping into a ballpark's plumbing. That is the contradiction. The Walt Disney Company did not, under deadline, invent the video delivery system that would carry Disney+, ESPN+, and later a rebuilt Hulu. It purchased the system. The seller was not a famous Valley platform. The seller had been grown inside Major League Baseball, then spun into a company named BAMTech, a descendant of MLB Advanced Media. Hold the picture carefully. This is not a claim that baseball executives dictate Disney's media strategy. It is a narrower, stranger fact. Disney literally bought a video delivery company that a baseball league had created, staffed, and already rented to other entertainment giants. In 1 week, on August 21st, 2026, the English Premier League is scheduled to launch its first direct-to-consumer streaming service in Singapore, Premier League Plus, ahead of the new season. Headlines will treat the launch as a rupture. For football in that market, it may be. For the industry, it is a late echo. The blueprint for a league becoming its own broadcaster was drafted when broadband was still a luxury and live video still a dare. The dare belonged to baseball. The payoff belonged years later to a mouse. Between 2016 and 2022, Disney's checks for that company climbed past $3.8 billion. The public remembers the castle. Almost no one remembers who poured the concrete. The screen looks frictionless. The ownership trail does not. Follow it backward, past the launch parties, and the story does not begin on a studio lot. In 2000, Major League Baseball's club owners did something that sounded bureaucratic and small. They each wrote a check for $1 million and agreed to stop treating the internet as 30 separate hobbies. The new entity was called MLB Advanced Media. Its first assignment was not cinematic. Centralize the team websites, standardize the scoreboards, the ticket links, the ugly early banners. Put one spine under a sport that still measured itself in local television contracts and afternoon newspapers. $30 million is not a war chest in media. It is a club assessment. That is why the later scale still startles. The league was not trying to invent a global platform. It was trying to stop looking late. What most fans missed, even as they clicked, was the problem hidden inside a baseball schedule. Games cluster. First pitches land in the same narrow windows. A comedy special can stagger its audience across an evening. A slate of night games cannot. If the picture breaks at 7:05 Eastern, it breaks for a country at once. By 2002, the same shop that had been hired to tidy homepages began pushing live video. Audio had already proven that fans would sit with a laptop and a bad speaker if the home radio feed was dark. Video was a different animal. Existing third-party tools could host a clip. They buckled when thousands, then tens of thousands, then more asked for the same live feed at the same second. Buffering was not an inconvenience. It was an eviction notice from the living room. So the baseball operation did the unglamorous thing. It started building the back end itself. Encoders, origin servers, a delivery fabric tuned for spikes instead of catalog browsing. Authentication that could tell a subscriber in Denver from a blacked-out zip code 2 miles from the ballpark. The product the public saw was MLB.TV, out-of-market games sold as a season pass to expatriates, night shift workers, and the lonely diaspora of every club. The product the league actually built was a private broadcaster that did not need a satellite truck for every extra household. Around that pipe grew the rest of a digital clubhouse: e-commerce, ticket inventory, the official site of every franchise, speaking one technical language. A fan buying a cap and a fan buying a pitch were, on the wiring diagram, cousins. That centralization looked from the stands like a redesign of fonts. It was a transfer of leverage. Local rights holders still owned the big regional windows. The league now owned a second door, one that did not require begging a cable operator to find channel 612. Through the mid-2000s, the service remained a curiosity to people who did not travel. To people who did, it became the only honest way to follow a team after a job moved them across a time zone. Revenue followed the migrants. So did the engineering debt and the engineering pride. Each October stress tested the same thesis. Either the picture held when a deciding game started, or the whole experiment became a joke told in sports radio voices. The picture held often enough that other properties began to notice a baseball office in New York behaving like a technology vendor. The historical blind spot is here, not in some later acquisition headline. Baseball was mocked for years as the analog sport, the one that could not make its young people care, the one still married to afternoon beer commercials.
While that joke circulated, the league's least photogenic division was learning to move live pictures at a scale Hollywood had not yet demanded of itself. The contradiction from the castle screen is already forming, years before any mouse lawyer enters the room. A sport built a broadcast plant because no one would rent it a plant that worked. Once you own a plant that works, you stop being only a sport.
The person to follow is Bob Bowman. Not a commissioner, not a shortstop, a former finance executive from Barry Diller's IAC world who took the job of making those club websites behave, then refused to stop at behave. Bowman treated delivery as an ownership question. If the league rented its future from a Silicon Valley vendor, the vendor would set the outages, the rates, and the roadmap. If the league owned the stack, opening day belonged to baseball, even when the rest of the internet was on fire. That obsession had a cost. Engineers had to be hired into a culture that still thought in clubhouses and territorial rights. Owners had to keep funding a shop whose best nights were the nights nothing visible happened. Bowman's argument to those owners was not poetry. Digital rights were the last inventory they might still control after regional sports networks and national partners carved the rest. Give the inventory away, and you become a content farm for someone else's login page. Keep it, and you have a second commissioner in code. Across town, other entertainment bosses were circling the same fear from the opposite direction.
Vince McMahon's WWE wanted a 24-hour house network without waiting for a cable carriage war it might lose. In February 2014, WWE Network launched on the baseball-born pipes, selling a monthly feed of archives and premium events to fans who had already learned to pay the company directly. A year later, in April 2015, HBO Now used the same family of technology to leave the cable bundle, timed to a moment when a dragon show made every missed login feel like a national event. Those two rentals matter because they change Bowman's company from a league utility into a proof. A wrestling empire and a prestige television brand do not hire a ball club for nostalgia. They hire it because the stream stayed up. Inside Disney, the fear had a different face. Bob Iger could see Netflix training audiences to ignore the cable box. Kevin Mayer, the strategist who would later run the direct-to-consumer brief, needed a way to stand up ESPN Plus and a Disney-branded service without spending 3 years discovering, in public, why live video is cruel. Buying time is a kind of motive. So is buying someone else's scar tissue. The life or death decision, for the baseball side, is whether to keep BAMTech as a captive tool or to sell pieces of it to the only buyer large enough to finish the map. Sell, and the owners cash an asset they never meant to build. Keep it, and they remain landlords of a plant they may not have the capital to globalize. Bowman wants the plant to be a business, not a back office. Iger wants the plant before the next earnings call turns into a eulogy for cable. Two hungers, one stack. Neither man is thinking about peanuts. The cruelty of live sports is not bandwidth in the abstract. It is the start time cliff. Encodes must fork into a ladder of qualities, so a phone on a weak cell tower and a set-top box on fiber can both stay near the pitch. Digital rights rules have to paint blackouts by zip code without taking down a lawful stream 2 towns over. A commentary track, a home feed, an away feed, and a condensed game all leave the same building and must not collide. When the system fails, it does not fail as a polite delay. It fails as a roar of refunds. That is the barrier BAMTech existed to break, and it is why the rentals keep arriving. The National Hockey League puts its digital weight on the same family of rails. Other tours and mid-sized rights holders follow, not because they love baseball, but because building a private CDN and a concurrency engine is a miserable way to spend a commissioner's political capital. Each new tenant raises the valuation. Each new tenant also raises the risk that the plant has become too valuable to remain a clubhouse experiment. August 2016 is the first crack in the old ownership.
Disney announces it will take a 1/3 stake for $1 billion, with a path to majority control. The number is not a tip. It is a statement that a baseball technology shop now prices like a strategic weapon. Inside Burbank, the logic is cold. Netflix is already teaching children that libraries live inside an app. ESPN's cable rates still mint money, but the cord is fraying at the edges. If Disney waits to write its own origin stack, it will launch into a market that has already chosen a habit. If it buys the stack, it can argue about branding, while the pipes already know how to survive a face-off. A year later, the second check lands. In August 2017, Disney agrees to pay about $1.58 billion more to raise its stake to 75%. The deal closes that autumn. Majority is not a metaphor. Baseball remains a partner and a client. It is no longer the boss. Bowman steps away from the chief executive chair as the buyer moves in. The trade-off is visible on both ledgers. The clubs receive a windfall from an assessment they once treated like a website tax. They also watch their most modern asset slide onto someone else's org chart. Disney receives a working factory and an instant excuse to announce dates. It also inherits a culture trained on nightly games, not on princess catalogs, kids' profiles, and the licensing maze of 100 territories. Then the calendar becomes a weapon. ESPN Plus opens on April 12, 2018, a leaner service meant to catch the sports fan who will pay a smaller bill for out-of-market games, exclusives, and the sense that the mothership still knows his name. 18 months later, on November 12, 2019, Disney Plus walks through the same architecture wearing a friendlier face. 10 million signups are claimed in the first day. The victory photograph is a castle. The unphotographed labor is capacity planning, borrowed from a league that already knew what a Sunday night looks like when everyone presses play together. Present tense, now, in the war room that is not called a war room. Dashboards climb, authentication queues swell. A title that every child already knows begins to spin. Somewhere a baseball-trained engineer watches a concurrency graph that used to spike at first pitch and now spikes at bedtime in 4 time zones. The plant holds well enough to become folklore. Well enough is not the same as gracefully. Login stumbles and password-sharing arguments arrive on schedule, because every new door teaches a new kind of theft. Through the early 2020s, Disney folds more of its direct-to-consumer map onto the acquired rails, including the long project of making Hulu feel like a sibling rather than a hostage from an older joint venture. In 2022, the third check closes the circle. Disney pays about $900 million to buy the remaining stake and take full ownership of the company baseball built. The plant is no longer a joint curiosity, it is a division. Look at the sequence without romance, and the tensions do not resolve. Idealism said a league could own its destiny if it owned its pipes. Reality said the pipes became so desirable that destiny got a price tag. Profit said take the billions. Risk said you are selling the only modern institution you created without a broadcaster's permission. Ambition at Disney said launch before the habit sets elsewhere. Constraint said you cannot invent reliability in a keynote. Barriers break in public. Dominoes fall in private. WWE learned it could collect monthly from fans without a cable gatekeeper, then had to keep paying whoever owned the rails. HBO learned that leaving the bundle is a beginning, not a coronation. ESPN learned that a Plus-branded app can grow subscribers and still not replace the old carriage fees that built the company. MLB learned that being early is not the same as staying landlord. There is a wound under the victory lap. The league that could not find a vendor later had to sit in the vendor's chair as a customer of the company it once was. Disney got the factory it needed, and with it, the permanent job of feeding a machine whose appetite is measured in simultaneous households, not in earned-run averages. Other leagues now study the same doorway and tell themselves they are first. They are first only in their own market. The architecture they want already went to auction. And then the owner changes, but the spike at the top of the hour does not. A familiar object can hide a change of landlord. The remote still fits the same hand. The play button still pretends to be simple. Behind it, the right to move a live or almost live picture has become a kind of territory, as real as a ballpark deed, and
and far easier to sell without anyone in the seats noticing. The larger principle is not that technology always wins, or that old institutions are secretly in charge. It is colder than that. The organizations forced to solve an ugly, timed, simultaneous problem often end up owning the only plant that works. They do not look like the future while they are solving it. They look like accountants of inconvenience. Baseball did not set out to tutor Hollywood. It set out to keep a road game visible in a hotel. The scar tissue from that small mercy became an asset with a buyer. Disney did not set out to become a baseball story. It set out to stop dying at the mercy of a cable bundle and a rival library. Purchase was faster than pride. Speed has a moral quality only in earnings season. Everywhere else, it is just a preference about who absorbs the outage.
For the audience that lives inside these apps, the human stake is ordinary and therefore easy to miss. A night shift that still catches a first pitch. A child who can start a film without a parent negotiating a channel package. A household that cancels one bill and inherits 3 logins, each with its own silence when the stream dies. Convenience is not free. It is a relocation of power from the people who used to own the wires in your street to the people who own the login that follows you from couch to airport. Other leagues will keep walking toward that login. Some will rent, some will build, some will sell. Late, after the valuation has already migrated to a larger animal. The names on the chyrons will change. The hourly spike will not. Picture, instead of a lesson, a groundskeeper locking a stadium after a day game. The lights die in sections. The concourse echoes. Somewhere else, on glass the size of a palm, the same sport, or a cartoon, or a fight, continues without any smell of grass. The plant that makes that possible used to have a league's name on the door. Then it had a studio's name. Tomorrow it may have a name that has not been printed yet.
Who, when the next picture starts at the same second in 10 million rooms, will actually own the second?